City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded January 9, 2023.
Good evening, everyone. It is 6:11, and I am calling the Finance Committee to order. Calling of the roll.
Morrow.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Dalton.
Here.
Plassance.
Here.
And Aldershore is excused.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. Item 2 under discussion and possible action on consideration of options for addressing challenges in the 2024 operating budget. I don't see an action item here, so I think we're looking to presentation from Comptroller Treasurer. Is that correct? Ooh. If you're,
yes.
Okay, there we go. Voice. What is?
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. So, yes, I included a memo in your packet explaining a little bit more about all of the options and sort of the decision that needs to be made. So, for the referendum option, our deadline would be this month, January, one way or another, either to decide that we're going to go with that or to let that option pass us by. Last month, I know we talked a little bit about a special election, and I do have an update on that. For a special election, we can't hold a special election for a referendum unless we're affected by a natural disaster that basically increases our cost. So we really should think that January is the deadline of, if we want to go to a referendum, this is the month that we would have to make a decision on that. As I noted in my memo, I thought it was important to really take a little bit of time to explain why we are in this situation. And it's not related to any mistake that the city made or anything that anyone did. Really what it comes down to is policies at the state level, namely that the state really has not been coming through on the state aid that they provide. And the other problem is that we have levy limits that are unsustainable. And levy limits, it used to be you got at least 3% for new construction, or you got at least 3% for inflation or net new construction. And then in 2012, that changed. Now we're limited to only net new construction, which works okay in a year where we have a lot of construction going on. However, for the 2024 budget, we're looking at one of those years where we have a bit of a gap in new construction. So that's why we have this issue, and that's why we need to look at our options. Just hang on one second. I just got to grab a sip of water here. I'm getting a little raspy.
Yeah, please go ahead. I could tell you were not speaking in your normal tone of voice.
Okay, yep. So hopefully this is better. So really what it comes down to is our costs go up every year, just like any other business, any other organization. Our costs do go up, and we don't really have a way to account for that under the current levy limit formula. Right now we're projecting that our net new construction adjustment will be 1.5%. And in today's inflationary environment with 7 to 9% inflation, that really just isn't very reasonable. So, we're not looking for necessarily a ton of money, but our costs do go up over time, so we need a way to account for those costs. We need a way to continue to fund the city's operations and to meet those cost increases. So Okay, so looking at those options, as I laid out in the memo, the transportation utility, there really is a compelling case for that based on the cost to residential properties. I hope you had a chance to look at those graphs to see how each different property type is affected. We can see that a transportation utility has the least impact on residential properties. So that definitely makes a strong case for a transportation utility. The major roadblock is the legal issues. And right now there is a case that's going to the Supreme Court to decide basically whether a transportation utility is legal in Wisconsin. So that's our major roadblock to doing a transportation utility is that legal holdup. And then the only other thing that I'll note is if we do decide to go to a referendum, we're certainly not obligated to follow through with that in terms of increasing the levy. If we have a favorable Supreme Court decision later in the year, certainly we could decide to lean heavier on the transportation utility as opposed to the referendum. Of course, I do understand that it's quite a process to go through a referendum, to say the least. It involves a lot of work. So it certainly isn't something that we want to go through unnecessarily. But it's just, we're in a position right now where it's almost a little bit hard to know what to do because we don't know how this year is going to unfold as far as what the Supreme Court is going to decide with the transportation utility, or if we finally see the state coming through with some more aid. I know that's being talked about more seriously than it has, in the past, but it's just one of those things where it's okay, how much do we want to rely on that? So with that, I guess I'll open it up for if anyone has any questions on my memo.
Okay, questions for the comptroller treasurer from members of the committee? Comments, not only questions, I guess you might wish to comment. Is that, you're going yes or? Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. A couple things. I was looking at the wording that you had as far as the levy referendum. Now, are we looking at this for 1 year or continuing to collect this money every year after?
So we would continue to collect this money every year. So basically, it would be added to the base. The growth in our operations, as far as the growth in cost continues. So it would be on an ongoing basis. So basically what we would do is, rather than increasing our levy by 1.5 or 2.5, or rather than increasing our levy by 1.5%, we would increase it by either 2.5 or 3, and then that would be added. Then for future years, we would continue to build on top of that.
So the reason that we were looking at this in the first place, one of the main reasons was because of the construction that wasn't done this coming year. Are we figuring then that down the road we're still going to have these construction problems?
Well, the thing is that we'll still be kind of down from that year because we'll still have that money that's not really in the base. So, for instance, our levy probably needs to grow by 2.5 to 3% a year. So if we have a year like this that's a down year, one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we're talking about these options is because, so say we only increase by 1.5%, well then that's also cumulative. If our expenses grow by 3% and our revenues only grow by 1.5%, that's something that continues year after year after year. So that's why as our expenses increase, we want to increase our revenues by a similar amount so that we stay in balance.
Okay. Got one other question too. It was brought to my attention that there's also a contingency fund option possibility. Do we have a contingency fund?
Yes.
Yes, we do have a contingency fund. We actually budget quite a bit less than we used to in it. We used to budget $100,000 in our contingency fund. For the 2022 budget, actually, we got hit right at the end on a state aid reduction, and that really hit our contingency fund. So right now the contingency fund is at $32,000 is what we budget on an annual basis from the 100 that we used to budget before.
Okay, thank you.
That answer your questions?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as we talked about this in December, I said I was generally supportive of the concept of a referendum, and in the succession of dominoes here, it seems like we need to make this choice and put this out because we can let the people decide, and also it will give us some flexibility if the legal cards don't fall in our favor for the transportation utility. So I'm generally supportive, and I think being able to keep up with those cumulative gaps is really an essential part of being able to do what we do.
Anything? I have one question. I look at the charts and it's not entirely clear. I know when we did the referendums for the referenda, for the healthcare center, we tried to calculate it on a per 100,000. And we broke it down even further than that when we did some outreach. But what are we looking at both 2.5 and then at 3 per 100,000? I think we're going to scare a lot of people.
Sure. So, and are you looking for the difference between the 1.5 and the 2.5, or the total increase?
Well, your increase, the way you have these written, is by 2.5. One option is the question would be the 2.5. The other question would be 3%. And with that, because you know the people are going to ask, what does this mean for me? So breaking it down into $100,000 or even mills, I mean, that's one way that people can relate to it. Otherwise, the graph doesn't tell me a whole lot.
Okay, sure. So basically, if we went with the 2.5, it would be an additional 11.3 cents per thousand. So that would be $11.30 on a $100,000 home.
Okay.
And then at the 1.5, it would be an extra 17 cents per thousand. So that would be an extra $17 per $100,000 home.
Okay. All right. I'll take your question, then I'll go to the audience.
Okay. Not really a question, but Corey, you touch on it in your memo. There has been some criticisms, I suppose, in regards to TIF, and you touch on it in your memo. Can you explain why TIF is not really causing this issue, and lack of TIF incentives would not fix the issue?
Yes, because for TIF developments, they still count toward our net new construction number. So just because a development occurs in a TIF, we still get the credit for it in its net new construction. So actually, years where we have big developments in TIF districts actually are very, very helpful for the operating budget. So yeah, it would be incorrect if somebody tells you that, well, that we're in this situation because of TIF. That's not correct, just based on the levy limit formula.
I will go to the audience for, yes, sir, please approach the microphone and please just state your name. Oh, yeah, and you got that little screen. I can let you use mine.
Oh, this is fine.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Bill Bushman, Elmwood Avenue, City of Stevens Point. Corey, just question, did you touch on the cost per 100,000 at the 3% level?
Yes, so the cost per 100,000 would be $17.
How much, Nate?
17.
17. Okay.
But we're anticipating that, we'll already have a 1.5% adjustment just based on what we have for our net new construction. So your total all day, 1.5 and 1.5 would be $34 per 100,000 is what I would expect for the total levy adjustment, which would be both, sort of our base of what we're already allowed to do and then the additional.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. I mean, as I look at your graph, and I looked at this last night, I mean, each one of the options has their pitfalls. It's going to affect somebody. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I knocked out the utility item personally. I thought didn't make the most sense. I wasn't exactly sure how that would still apply. When I look at it and I go down further and I think, well, it's going to affect churches and the school more than it is the residential. Well, if it affects the school, guess what? It's going to come right back at us, in my opinion, because they're going to have to increase their taxes or their levy to pass on to the residential property owner. The one thing that hasn't been talked about in this discussion, and obviously it was in your memo, Corey, was, and I think that's really what you need to do. We're not talking huge dollars here. I mean, quite frankly, for somebody with a $300,000-$400,000 home, you're looking at, probably $50. It's not the end of the world. But everybody's different. I understand that. But the thing that we're not talking about is cost reduction somewhere within the city budget. And if you look at what the other cities have had to do, Marshfield, Merrill, in your write-up, why aren't we talking about that? I mean, I understand every year you go through this process. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes because it's not an easy decision, but it sometimes has to be made. And, like the one city, maybe it's either reducing, cutting the hours of the pool. It's staffing. Could be a Christmas parade. I mean, there's got to be a host of things that we do that are important to the city. But I think you have to take a hard look at that. And maybe it's a combination of that and some type of a levy increase. The referendum, I don't think you can go to a referendum, quite frankly, without talking about some type of what the city can do to help the situation. You can't continue to pass this tax on to the residences every year. Mine went up over $300 this year. Now, most of that was school and county. Very little to the city, thank you. Well, I shouldn't say that. The city was up, I think, 4%, if I'm not mistaken. But you just can't continue to pass this cost or these additional costs on to city residences. And some are more fortunate than others. But, and this is ongoing. This is not a one-time shot, which I wish we could do also. I'm guessing there were probably increases coming out of the Water Sewer Commission earlier today. Stormwater, I'm guessing. I don't know for a fact because I didn't see their agenda or their minutes. But I'll bet you they're talking about rate increases there. You're talking about a reassessment coming up in 2023. We have a road project. I mean, where is this going to end? I don't have an easy answer, but I'm just saying, I think you have to look at really hard at cost reductions within your budget. Maybe it's staffing. Maybe you got to eliminate some positions. I don't have that answer. Only you have that answer, or your various departments have that answer. So just my 2 cents worth. If I had to vote for one, again, I don't care which one I guess you go with. I mean, $50 isn't going to make or break. But it's just, this is ongoing, and when you add this all up, I'm thinking those people just aren't going to be real happy with you. So.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
In defense of staff, they did spend a lot of time at budget and went through and cut a significant amount of costs so that we were able to provide additional money for staff that we already have. So they really, really sharpened their pencils to their credit, and there's some things that are going to be cut.
And I think we as residents need to know that. I
Absolutely.
Never see any of that.
Right.
So I feel a lot better knowing that type of knowledge.
Yeah, you make a good point, because it was a big part of their work they were tasked with, and you didn't know about it. So we need to do a better job sharing that information. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have 2 cents worth, as Mr. Bushman said?
Mark Christensen, 1641 Clark Street, District 1 Alder. I guess my thoughts is I looked through all the information that Corey provided and did a very nice job, I think, laying those things out. I think, to me, when I take a look at those charts, the two that strike me the most are the first two. Those are the ones that show the impact on our vast population, on the majority of the people, on the voters. And you can see that the hit on a utility would be about a third of what it would be as opposed to a referendum. When you take a look at the entities that are going to be impacted by the utility that wouldn't be impacted by a referendum, yeah, UWSP, I think it's $14,000. I'm not sure that $14,000 in UWSP's budget is going to make a major impact. I do think I'm still in favor of the transportation utility just because of the fact it does spread the impact. I think there's uncertainties in both of the options. With the referendum, there's no certainty that it's going to pass either.
Right.
And so that's got probably even a larger uncertainty than what the utility does. I do think the fact that utilities have been implemented and have been successful in other places, including neighboring communities, I do think that it's a very viable option, and it's still the one that I would prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Anyone else? Is the attorney, Logan's not here today?
He's in
Oh, is he?
overflow.
Okay, I have a question. Legal.
Logan, could you come on in?
Legal question. He's over there. Actually, two questions. Hello. First question. If the Supreme Court would find, in your opinion, of course you're projecting here, if they would find that transportation utilities are illegal, I believe that's the question before the court, would then stormwater utilities be subject to that sort of, because there are similar sort of things, and so I'm curious.
No, and I think, and this is actually something that Joel could comment on better than I can, but if I recall correctly, it's that it has to do with timing of when the laws were enacted with regards to creation of these new types of fee structures.
Okay.
So off the top of my head, I can't answer that very precisely, but nothing I've seen would tend to indicate that would be under threat. Because I mean, why not go one step further and say, does that mean a water utility is illegal?
Right.
Or I don't think that's under threat, and none of the I've read through the briefing in one of these cases, and there's nothing in there from the plaintiffs that suggests that they're seeking any type of ruling that's that broad.
Does this have to do with, I think it was either 2015 or 16, there was a change in statute when 13, was it that long ago? Okay, man, time flies. Okay, so it's relative to that. Go ahead, Director.
Add to that a little bit. Actually, this is very similar to when we did create the stormwater utility, the environment anyway, from people, I guess, seeking relief from this. When we started the stormwater utility, there was similar lawsuits out there, and I think similar reasons for objection, right? But you'll notice we still have a stormwater utility.
Right.
So that went into place January 1 of 2013. I think Act 20 that year was the act that made certain fee-based systems illegal unless you also reduce your levy amount by the same amount, right? So if you wanted to collect it through a fee instead of through a levy, you could still do it, but you couldn't do both in some cases. Now, what's proposed here, if it's proposed, is we just need to be careful about it. And there's actually very good guidance out there on this. The things that this transportation utility couldn't cover are pretty clear to us. You know, the way we'd propose an ordinance for this would be very specific. And I think actually that lack of specificity is probably what's getting some of the legal ball rolling. Because if you put into an ordinance, or we'll collect more at any time for any other costs we want to collect it for, that's not what this is about, right? These are for transportation eligible expenses. So when you add all that together, not collecting it for some of the things you can't, like snow plowing, street sweeping, that kind of thing, it fits the Act 20 guidelines, all those things considered, I think the same kind of legal matters exist now as did when we implemented the stormwater one.
So the information that you've read, talking with your colleagues around the state and others, in that narrowness of, and creating, usually you don't want to create a lot of specificity in ordinances or laws, but because of that, there is some level of confidence that they would be found to be legal.
I would say so. And Scott, well, on the legal side, I wouldn't comment, but from the guidance that we've looked at as far as how to create these, what to stay away from, that you can't just say we're collecting a fee and we're going to put it wherever. Yeah, there's, I mean, it fits the routine of what we've done already very well.
Okay.
And everything seems pretty similar.
Okay. Thank you. Then I have one more legal question. So what we see here, of course, language carved right from statute. I love that language that nobody understands. Could there be a referendum related to transportation utility? So people are given the option. I mean, we're trying to decide here, and
So there could, I mean, you can use referenda pretty flexibly. The thing about doing that is that if you have a transportation or a transportation utility approved via a binding or non-binding referendum, it would not insulate you from a court ruling saying that those are contrary to the state statutes. So, if you're willing to go to the voters for funding, it would be a lot more sensible, I think, from a legal perspective, to just do a revenue referendum.
got it. Thank you.
And just a little extra detail here. Kind of what got the ball rolling on this transportation utility concept. It's actually a legal opinion from the league that's dated from June of 2020. So obviously a fairly new concept, but this isn't something that that's like shockingly innovative, I guess you could say, in the sense that it's coming, basically from research that was done by the attorneys at the league. So.
Thank you. Oh, since no one else is raising their hands, I'll ask you to come back up and visit with us.
The only other question I have is, if you look at the utility, it seems like, again, I'm looking at Corey's graph, it's the businesses, it's the Targets, it's the schools, the church. I mean, has anybody talked this concept through with them at all? I don't think we can afford to be less business friendly when we're up against Plover, quite frankly. What do you think that's going to do to this, attracting new business? I don't like it. I'm sorry. I mean, I would rather see the wheel tax, quite frankly. I know that's more in a residential detriment, but I think this utility is just the wrong way to go in light of all of these other unknowns, court case and business development.
Thank you.
So, yep.
All right. Oh, Mr. Christensen, Alder Christensen, I should say.
I would just like to point out that the impact on businesses will actually be greater with a referendum than it would be on the utility. That if you take a look at Corey's graphs, you'll see that with the exception of those that actually are like a gas station, they would see a higher. But if you take a look at Target, or if you take a look at Century, take a look at Lineage, you'll see that the impact on those businesses are greater on a referendum than they are on the utility.
I agree.
Thank you. And do we have, I guess we have to make a decision. Oh, yes, please.
So we've talked about this before, and actually Bill brought up a pretty good point. I've already asked all the directors for council to make a list of all of the cuts that have already been made. We talk about them at meetings, but the general public may not be paying attention to the meetings. I know I wouldn't watch it if I didn't have to. To understand what we did. Just this year alone, the Parks Department took cuts in their landscaping upkeep. We're not watering the medians. The Community Development Department took money out of their training budget. So there were cuts that were made just this year. We've had reductions in staff over the years. The Christmas parade isn't us, by the way. That's all downtown. It doesn't cost us a dime. But we continue to work at those cuts all of the time, and we just don't probably make them as public as we should. So we've cut staff and services. We should have some information for council on Monday. But I want to talk about the alternative that I've mentioned before we still aren't really talking about, and that is having the state return some of the money that we're already paying in. Corey mentions it in his memo. Part of the reason we're here is because of continued reductions in state shared revenue. That's money we pay in. We should be getting that back. Stop taking more of our money and give us what we are owed. We're working on the state level on a couple of different ways to get that restored. All of it really is part of shared revenue. Whether the governor's budget is going to get passed, he's proposing an increase in state revenue, not to where we used to be, but that's going to help us, giving us the money that we've already paid back. We don't have to raise taxes. Sales tax is another good option. State collects a fair amount of money from Portage County sales tax and Stevens Point sales tax. Return some of that to us. The other option would be excluding emergency services from levy limits. All of these things are starting to gain some traction down in Madison. Nothing's for sure, but none of those require an increase in anyone's taxes or anyone's utility fees. I am not in favor of a spending referendum. I want to get what we've already paid back to where it's supposed to be. And I think that's the option that I want to focus on to try and get that money back to Stevens Point where it belongs. So we've got tons of options, but I don't think referendums or even transportation utilities are the answer just yet.
Thank you for that opinion.
Add one thing. One other thing is I know that I've talked to our elected representatives to try to talk the same thing the mayor has about trying to get some of our money back. One other thing is that all the fireworks are also not from the city budget as well.
They are not.
And because I've heard that as well, that we're paying for fireworks, and we are not paying for fireworks. That's donated by the local business leagues and so on.
And I appreciate that all of those things are not, they're relatively small when you start looking at a $26 million budget. So the fact of the matter is the comptroller treasurer is telling us that in 2024, it's going to be not great. So because of not enough net new construction, and unfortunately that's the way we measure success, which I think is kind of silly, but that's my opinion. And so we either do something, what we can do is go, okay, we've learned a lot, let's go talk to people, bring it back. Council can consider this next week, or we send a recommendation from this committee to council to consider next week. Either way, I think because of timelines and for the challenges that we would face in 2024 and onward, and it would be lovely if the state said, here. It'll be great just to get a budget passed, I believe. So that's where we are. Yes, we should be looking to cut, but you can only cut so much, and then there's nothing more to cut. People look like little stick figures, then you slice them down to nothing. We have important services to provide. We have to figure out how to pay for them. And our most important asset is the staff. And if we don't have staff, your road won't get plowed, the parks won't get cleaned up, garbage won't get picked up, roads won't be repaired, permits won't get processed. That's where we are. So, what is it that you would like to do? This is a committee decision. If you want to push it to council for full discussion, I think it's fair game. If you wish to advance a recommendation, I would entertain a motion.
I would make, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would make a motion that goes to full city council for consideration.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Is there any additional discussion?
think I'll add just a moment there.
Oh, certainly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it seems like we're stuck here at the moment. We've got a time frame of the spring election. We don't see how we're going to be able to get any money back from the state before probably 2024. The utility seems like a nice way to go, but that might be illegal. I think we really have no choice in the fact that we need to consider, getting everyone involved and getting a decision about a referendum and which option to choose on that.
I will be honest, I think the transportation referendum narrowly, very prescribed, is probably will hold up based on my evaluation, and I did read the information from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities because I wanted to be informed. So at any rate, we do have a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions? Motion carries. It will be on next week's agenda for council. Item 3 is to award of 2023 contracted city tree operations to Zableski Brothers in the not-to-exceed amount of $32,055. I would entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Again, more expenses. Trees need to get trimmed, otherwise they start falling on people's houses and cars.
And power lines.
And power lines. And other things. We had a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Abstentions? Motion carries. Item 4 is approval of the claims that have already been paid. I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
Move approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Are there any questions for Comptroller on any of the claims that have been paid? Excellent. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions? Motion carried. Item 4, adjourn into closed session approximately 6:55 p.m. Boy, that's pretty close. Pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, paren 1, paren E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session on the following. Item A is discussion of possible action on acquisition of parcels within TIF 11. If you want, I can read the parcel numbers.
I'm good.
Okay. I would entertain a motion based on that reading.
Aldermaro so moved.
We have a motion, and is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to go into closed session. I believe we generally ask for a roll call vote.
Morrow,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Dalton,
No.
LaSense.
Aye.
That is a majority to go into closed session. We will now go into closed session. It is 6:49. Will we be reconvening?
We will not.
Okay, we will not reconvene in open session for any decisions.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.